Sustain 267.
Welcome to the introductory episode of Sustain 267 podcast on Yarona FM, where we talk about climate change, the environment, and sustainability in Botswana, Africa, and the rest of the world. We're bringing this feature to you because climate change and its effects are just way too important to leave to scientists, researchers, activists, and those in government. It's something we need to speak about at home, while you're driving to work, while you're in a combi, and definitely on your favorite radio station. We need to speak about it everywhere because it is everywhere. I am your host, Batokili Siti. So after months of planning, Sustain 267 is now on Wired with Lerato Mudiegi on Wednesday at 9:35 a.m. weekly. The first episode, I had a conversation with Lerato. Finally.
And finally, we get to start off Sustain 267. Now, for somebody who doesn't understand the child that is Sustain 267, tell us about it.
Lerato, firstly, good morning. And finally, we do get started. Good morning to you and your listeners. For a little introduction on Sustain 267. So Sustain 267 is basically an organization that looks at getting individuals, businesses, civil society, governments, policymakers to be more proactive on addressing the climate crisis, looking at how do we adapt to it, how do we live alongside it now that it's happened, and how do we get more people to know about it. So, and with it has come the Sustain 267 podcast, and that's where we talk everything climate change, everything about the environment, sustainability in Botswana, in Africa, in the rest of the world, and it's called Sustain 267 because it's about sustaining home, sustaining quarantine, which again, Botswana, it's on the continent and it's the rest of the world. And yeah.
Okay. Now, coming home into, like you're saying, what a Sustain 267 means, us sustaining our home, right? Where we live. Why did you feel the need to have conversations around climate change, but bringing it home? Where did you see the gap? I know we keep talking climate change. It's not climate change, the word climate change and the concept behind it and knowing what it is, it's not a new thing to us, right? Mm-hmm. You've been taught about it, this is what's happening, global warming. How got the global warming? Right. But we see everybody else marching and doing all of these things, but in BW we've never really seen anything that's that extreme. Where did you see the gap and why did you feel the need to address it here?
So where I saw the gap is, I believe we can't address something if we don't know it exists. And if we don't have the information on it, which is where I think we are on climate change. So where I saw the gap is that although we all talk about climate change, there wasn't quite an understanding what is this climate change thing. Larry, where is it from? How does it affect us as Africans, as Botswana? Polar bears, and as soon as you bring in the polar bears, we completely divorce Africans and Botswana from the conversation because this has nothing to do with us. So the gap we are feeling currently is getting Botswana to understand what is climate change? What does it mean for you? How is it impacting your life? At a personal level, how is it affecting your life financially? How is it affecting your life as an active citizen within your country? Because it has become a bit politicized. And how is it affecting every aspect of your life? But now, and then once you have the knowledge of how it's affecting you, then we can move to change. Then we can say, hey, that's about when you see them doing across the world, this is why they're doing. They're tweeting because the food on their plate is disappearing. We are a farming nation as Botswana. A lot of us rely on rain as an irrigation system. So if we don't address, for us it's very direct. The most obvious example of it is around food security and just the provision of food. So that's why we started the Sustain 267 podcast about 3 years ago. So far, we've got about 40 episodes, and it was about strictly African voices. So we only speak to Africans because we're trying to understand what climate change is. Africa, Botswana, what does it look like? So that's what will be unique about this feature. It will be bringing it down from where Sustain 267 podcast focuses on the continent. On the feature, we'll be talking about climate change, Botswana, trying to understand the science of it, the research, the traditional parts of it, where it's not a foreign concept. When we greet, and then immediately we're talking about the heat, the new levels of heat that we've never seen before. We're already talking about the climate, about climate change. So looking at understanding that well enough to do something with that information, and having people who use that information not only as a bad thing that's happening, but that knowledge as a form of power to act.
You know, when you speak of Horikana people out there, the reason why they're doing is because, or the reason why they're, coming together and rallying together is because, number one, food is disappearing, and you're saying we're a farming nation. And then you hear of conversations where even people on social media saying, because of what, the heat, my plant or the food that I have planted, hoping that I will harvest this year, is not the same harvest that I was getting or being able to get 10 years ago, even just 3 years ago. So it'd be really, really interesting to see what a way we're able to understand how do we then be able to firstly try and live in this new heat or this new season that we're in, but also how do we then be able to reverse back what we have been able, where we have contributed, okay, but Lena, I'm the problem.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what we'll be looking at. On top of that, now we've got the unique position here where we're an upper middle income country, but also we are coal dependent. So even at a global scale, we're trying to develop, although we are quite carbon intensive, trying to balance those two, and building on to what you just said, making it personal. How do some of our individual choices, what we wear, transport, food, lifestyle, of course, these are small things. These are very, very small things, but trying to just understand that relationship, and then from there looking to act. Climate change policies, as we know, we now have a policy as Botswana. Climate change. What does this climate change policy mean for me as a young Botswana? What can I do to make the most of it? Right now, with climate change becoming with it being such a huge problem, there are also people are seeing opportunity and how to respond to it in a way that's also growing your economy, in a way that's that's creating jobs, and as a result, addressing unemployment, because we know that's one of the items that we struggle with Botswana. So bringing all of that together with this feature, we're going to make sure that it's relevant to the people listening to it. We're not just talking about the science. It's getting hot. It's getting hot, but people are also unemployed. How are we bridging those two? It's getting hot, and just this week, I saw a picture of a watermelon for 100 pula. I was like, what? So how are we bridging those items? What kind of solutions are we putting in place, knowing Botswana and appreciating the uniqueness of our position?
You know what? I can't wait for next week, because that's when you start off with your first topic. But if we can just get like a little snippet, what are we going to be talking about next week?
So next week, we're going to start with the basic. What is climate change? So we're going to be looking at what is climate change and what does it look like in Botswana? What does the science say, and what do our lives in Botswana say about climate change? And then as the weeks go on, we'll unpack some of the more complicated terms that you'll come across for adaptation, mitigation, building resilience, MDCs and SDGs. And then we'll also get into things like what diet, how it impacts our food choices, what we wear, entertainment, get into maybe some recommendations of what to watch and what to listen to. But if you want a sneak peek at what our feature is going to look like as it rolls out, take a listen to Sustain 267 podcast. It's available on all podcast platforms, so your Spotify's, Apple Podcasts. We've already got 40 episodes in there. Feel free to binge ahead of next week. And then to make sure that we're also addressing things that people are actually curious about, please take a look at our social media pages, also at Sustain 267, where we'll be asking you what you would like us to share more information on, and any questions that you've got that we can address on the feature.
Sustain 267.